Everybody, today I'm going to be speaking to Stephen Shwartz. His book is called Evil Robots, Killer Computers, and Other Myths. Got it right here. And super interesting read, really reinforcing a lot of the things I'm reading in other books. But even though the title is super sensational, he believes that artificial general intelligence won't be happening. We won't have the kind of sci-fi fears that we're seeing in movies come to real life ever. He doesn't think it's in his lifetime, my lifetime. He doesn't think it'll be ever, but he does think that there's some issues with narrow AI, and so we talk about that. So hopefully you enjoy. Thanks for watching or listening.
Would you like to live forever? We are finally starting to understand the human brain. Born from artificial intelligence singularity, I give you the last machine.
The David Bramante Show.
So Steve, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, David.
Yeah, of course. So I found your book. Here it is right here. You can tell that I read it. Evil Robots, Killer Computers, and Other Myths. As I'm like going through the book, I always wonder, what is it that is most interesting to the writer when you're writing it? And it's got how you're kind of jumping from the topics. It seemed like the biggest one that was kind of calling out to me as I was reading the book, you spent a long time on the narrow AI of Tesla and autonomous driving vehicles.
Yeah.
Correct me if I say any of these terms incorrectly.
No, that's great.
Yeah, so that does seem like the most maybe promising narrow AI that you see right now in this, what you labeled, or maybe other people do. It's the third wave of kind of AI excitement that we're experiencing.
Yeah. So, just to set the context, we've had a lot of success in AI in the last 10 years. I mean, I started doing AI in the late 70s, and AI was really hot in the early 80s, but it didn't deliver on its promises and kind of fell into disfavor. And now AI is hot because it's having a big impact on society. We have AI is enabling our smartphones to label our photos, translate language. So if we're in a foreign country and we don't speak the language, we can talk to a taxi driver. I wish I had this 30 years ago. And it's doing incredible things in almost every area. But the way it's doing them is through what I refer to in my book, and it's not my term. I think it's a term that Ray Kurzweil invented, called narrow AI. And narrow AI is distinguished from human level AI, which is the kind of AI you think of when you see science fiction movies, R2-D2, the Terminator, Westworld. All these movies have androids or robots that can think and reason like people. Computers can't do that today. We're nowhere near being able to do that. We may never be able to do it. So what we have today is narrow AI. We have AI that can be developed to do one very specific thing at a time, like label photos or translate language.
Right. Yeah. So you were saying in the past, AI, the terms have separated. So now people generally, I think most people are starting to understand the difference of, I think, AI. I don't hear people say narrow AI that often, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And then artificial general intelligence, that term now is kind of in, I think, the lexicon of more people. So people are seeing that difference. And like the main point of your book is here, like with Tesla's cars, for example, that's becoming very advanced narrow AI, but that's never going to become the Terminator. That it can never make that jump. So it's really within that one lane that it'll potentially become very amazing. It'll go to, I forget how exactly it works, but level 3 is unsupervised autonomous driving.
Right. So
Tesla's trying to move in that direction. But again, that's never going to evolve into like Skynet and Terminator and all of this crazy stuff.
Right. It's never going to do that. And in fact, it will likely be a very long time before you can get in your self-driving car at home and have it drive you anywhere. And that's because it's only narrow AI, and we can't teach self-driving cars to think and reason. So if you think about what happens when you get in a car, you encounter all kinds of things that are unexpected. There might be, you might see a car that's swerving, and you might start thinking about it and say, wow, that driver might be drunk. I'd better do X and Y to avoid them. Self-driving cars can't do that kind of thinking and reasoning. Everybody has crazy stories about driving. There are a billion drivers in the world. If everybody has one crazy story, and most people have more than that, if you think about it, the way we avoid accidents in all those crazy stories is by thinking and reasoning and figuring out how to navigate the unexpected.
Right.
What we might call the edge cases. We don't know how to teach computers to do that. And that's why we're very unlikely to see Tesla evolve into a self-driving car that will drive you anywhere. On the other hand, we are starting to see things like self-driving taxis that can navigate a limited number of city streets.
Major streets because of the map.
Yeah, right. We're starting to see them in San Francisco, even more so in China. But the reason we can do that is because every aspect of those streets is heavily mapped, where every telephone pole is. So there's very little unexpected that can happen. But it's very difficult to do that in a car that can drive anywhere.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think that was the big distinction I was pulling from the book as I was reading it, and the title is very dramatic. So that's how I caught my eye.
Yeah,
so it sucked me in, so I loved it. So great job.
Great.
Mark. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I guess the big takeaway from just all of that is, if in the beginning, actually, I noticed. I don't know if you noticed it, if you did it intentionally, or maybe it was unconscious. It seems like in the beginning of the book, you're like, AGI is never going to happen. Never, ever, ever. And then kind of as you're going in, you're like, it might not ever happen. And then towards the end, you're like, I don't know, it's probably it's not going to happen. But you came out really strong in the beginning. Did you notice that you did that in the book?
I actually didn't, but I'm sure you're right, and I'm guilty as charged.
You started to convince yourself. You're like,
yeah,
it could happen.
I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Ever.
And well, in the end of the book, I say, and this is what I really believe, it's about as likely as time travel.
Yeah.
So, if you ask me, is time travel ever going to happen? I really doubt it, but I wouldn't say absolutely positively never. And that's how I feel about artificial general intelligence.
But you definitely put time travel more, it's much harder to accomplish than this artificial general intelligence, right?
Oh,
there's a stacking of, you could believe that we could get to this general intelligence before we were time traveling. There is a logical, there's some steps involved, yeah?
Well, if I did that, it was unintentional, because I really do believe it's about as likely, AGI is about as likely as time travel.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. As I'm reading it too, I think, and I have no experience whatsoever. One, I'm so jealous you've been in this world for so long. To see this arc that you've experienced, because you said you started in the 70s.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine that. I have friends that, because my day job is real estate, a lot of commercial brokerage. And a buddy of mine he just retired, he's in his 60s from commercial real estate. He did all of this stuff without computers, even before fax machine. I'm like, how the hell did you guys get anything done before any of the technology that we have, But a lot of times we revert to cold calling. He's like, hey, we just had a phone, a phone in a phone book. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I remember going on sales calls, and every time I get lost, I'd have to go find a payphone and call and get directions, and there was no Google Maps.
right. Yeah.
And when I started my career in the mid to late 70s, I was teaching AI at a university in Baltimore, Towson University. Back then it was called Towson State University. But I didn't know I was teaching AI. I thought I was teaching statistics.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I was teaching, two of the techniques that I would teach, regression and classification, are now the basis of all of narrow AI.
Mm-hmm.
When your smartphone can label photos of your family and friends and so forth, it's doing that with a statistical classification technique. Now, it's a far more sophisticated classification technique than we had available back then, and it runs on far more powerful computers than we had back then. But it's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
So so I didn't even know I was teaching AI when I started.
It kind of evolved. Well, it's evolved a little bit around you because it sounds like mathematics, statistics, obviously that's been absorbed into this world, and it's all the kind of the same stuff, more advanced, and the language has kind of changed. I saw that chart that you had where you're like statistics in mathematics, and it's called what in this world of AI? Everything has its own lingo. Yeah,
everything has its own lingo, and that's actually a chart that a Stanford professor put together, a Stanford statistics professor put together, that I thought was fairly clever.
Yeah, showing that, hey, we're basically doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But the funding was different. Funding is bigger for the AI world.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was the amusing part of his table was, we call it one thing in statistics and another thing in AI, and we call it this in statistics and this in AI. And then at the bottom, the big difference is where you go to conferences, and, for statistics, you're going to Kansas, and for AI, you're going to Hawaii,
Exactly. Yeah, it was funny. Yeah, I like that. So you're still actively in this world? I'm semi-retired. I'm doing a lot of investing. I invest in AI companies. I'm mentoring several AI companies. Oh, cool.
I'm still writing about AI.
Yeah.
And I'm tempted to get back in and start another company, but I really enjoy not having a lot of stress in my life.
I hear you there. I know. I'm 39. I got some grays popping out.
Yeah.
So, but do you have an idea of a type of company that you would start if you were to?
There's so many opportunities in AI. I think one of the big trends you're going to see over the next year or two is companies that are taking advantage of the advances that have been made in natural language processing, understanding the everyday languages that people speak. And those advances have really kind of been triggered by actually a company local to you. I forget, David, are you in LA or San Francisco?
In LA.
You're in LA. Okay, so this would be more Silicon Valley, but a company called OpenAI developed a very well-known system called GPT-3 that just does some amazing things with language. It seems to be able to answer a lot of questions. It seems to be able to generate, snippets of text. So if you ask it to, write a story about something, it'll write a little story. Some of them make sense, some of them don't, but very impressive capabilities. And people are starting to take those basic types of tools, they're called language models, and build on them to do all kinds of things with natural language processing. So, you're seeing things like building tools that you can sell to companies to analyze how their sales force is doing on sales calls, to analyze those sales calls, to give them tips and that sort of thing. And there's all kinds of opportunities for especially commercial companies to use natural language to provide services. And I think that's pretty interesting. Another trend that started even earlier than that is taking advantage of computer vision. So being able to have a camera that can interpret what it sees. So you can, if you, instead of having somebody sit in front of a screen and just, make sure that nobody who walks in the door has a gun, you can build an AI system to do that. So same camera, but now instead of a person sitting there all day long, you can have an AI system that will sit there and ring an alarm if somebody walks in with a gun.
Right.
So applying that basic computer vision technique has been going on for a long time. And in Australia, they're using it on the highways to look at drivers and determine if a driver is texting. Yeah. And then giving them,
that's going to be a problem for a lot of people.
That's going to be a problem for a lot of people. I used to spend a lot of time in Australia. Wonderful. I love Australia, but they're really strict.
I think we saw that during COVID, huh? I thought they were all chill surfers,
Yeah.
Funny little accent, but with COVID, man, they clamped down so hard. It was.
You don't have 2 beers and then get in the car.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, I did notice in the book you mentioned a few times that you went to Australia. Why were you doing that so much?
So there was a company I was involved in, and it got bought by a big Australian company, financial services. And, I had always done startups and I was going to leave and go do something else. And they said, Steve, we need a global chief technology officer. And I said, well, I've never done that for a really big company. Mm-hmm. That would be really interesting. So I spent 5 years traveling to Australia, and it was really interesting. Although I have to admit, the big company thing isn't, I'm glad I didn't spend my whole career in big companies. But I loved Australia. I loved the company and the people, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, very cool. Interesting. Yeah. So going back for a sec, so you think kind of the 2 pockets where there's the greatest opportunity to start businesses would be kind of tapping into the OpenAI language, natural language processing, or the visual recognition that computers are doing. And it seems like it's always like security applications or like military applications for at least the visual component.
Oh, there's so many. I mean, there's so many others. You can use it to tell if your crops are growing correctly.
Right.
Where do you need watering? If you name any part of the economy or the government, there are people using especially computer vision in those areas.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. So do you think is there a possibility for somebody that has no background in any of these fields to, that didn't go to like a grad school to learn AI or any of this kind of stuff, or doesn't have that like mathematical background? Do you think that there's opportunities for those people to enter these worlds? It seems like they can't create the technology because it's so advanced, but some of the stuff they could figure out a creative application to use, like OpenAI. Obviously, you need some technical prowess, but
although it's
normal people who just, hey, I just got laid off. I'm gonna go into the AI world. Like, is that a feasible thing for people?
Absolutely. So take that example of computer vision.
Okay.
So let's say, I've been working in an area. Let's say I've been working in a type of store, and I say, wow, if only I could put a camera up there and have it watch what people are doing and do some kind of analysis based on that, and then sell that to other people. the software that you need, a lot of the software that you need to do that is available off the shelf. So you can find software that will say, "Oh yeah, that's David Bramante who just walked into the store." And now, you may need some coders to code what you want to do with that information. But it's not as technical as you would think. It's almost as accessible as really any other kind of software development, because there are libraries, actually freely available libraries that give you a lot of these deep technical capabilities.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, interesting. So you don't really have to be a technical person.
No, and I see a lot of as an angel investor, I see a lot of startups where the people starting the company aren't technical, and they bring in some technical people. They kind of understand what AI can do.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of understand this idea of computer vision or natural language processing, and they come up with a sellable use case, and they build a business around it.
Right. And now, are they this has nothing to do with your book. Are they finding you one-off? Do you have somebody that's helping you find these companies? How are you even getting connected with them?
So I'm part of two angel investor groups,
Gotcha.
one here in Connecticut and one in New York. New York Angels is actually one of the largest angel groups in the world. And companies apply, members actually actively go out and scout for companies. So, we'll look at Techstar graduates. Techstars is an accelerator where there are a lot of AI companies come out of Techstars and other accelerators like that. There are local organizations in Connecticut and New York that help startups get going, and these angel groups are connected with those. So we get a lot of deal flow that way.
Oh, cool. Interesting. And you've had some success with that?
I have.
I've invested in a few, and also there was a unicorn. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, I've had that's right. So I've made a lot of investments.
Yeah.
I've had one unicorn that will mean that no matter how many investments I make, this will always have been a profitable enterprise for me.
Beautiful. Congratulations.
That just means I got lucky once.
Yeah, for sure. And are they a public company that you're involved in?
Well,
would I know of the company, or?
The unicorn was public. It was the fifth best IPO of 2011. But it's since been, it hit a couple of bumps in the road and since been acquired. And so, no, you wouldn't recognize the name unless you were around in the telecommunications industry, around 2011.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah. There's a couple little points I wanted to hit. I loved all the this kind of crowd pleaser cultural references that you made to movies and stuff, about AI. And yeah, definitely, I think there is a fear around this concept, and I don't know if it's artificial. It's just created by Hollywood because it's fear-based, or is there something like inherently fear, like people are afraid of this concept, and as it starts to seem to be, the possibility does, compared to 1970, starting to feel like, oh, maybe you're an expert, you don't feel like it's ever going to happen. It's like time travel. But for the layman, it's like, wow, things are getting pretty advanced. Like we're seeing pictures that can recognize, faces and stuff like that. So it's maybe people are becoming more alarmed of it. But where do you think this fear is coming from? Is it generated to sell tickets, or is this a real fear we have?
I think it's due to the way people name things in the AI field. So imagine if the field were called computational statistics.
Pretty bad. We need to rebrand this. Yeah.
Which is actually, to me, a more accurate name for it, because that's really what we're doing. Going back to the 70s when I taught statistics, all of the successes in AI are due to this, statistical classification. And what we're really doing in narrow AI, especially, is really computational statistics.
Okay.
But we call it artificial intelligence, and then we have movies with these really intelligent robots that we also call artificial intelligence. So people naturally say, "Oh, wow, today we can label my pictures and translate languages. We're almost there." But that's not. It's really not true. And if we had called the ability to label pictures computational statistics,
Right,
then I'm not sure people would be making that connection. And there are a lot of, we tend to call, certain AI systems, they do quote unquote reasoning and, all kinds of words that link to human intelligence, when these systems aren't doing anything like what people do.
right, yeah.
So I think that's really where it comes from. And, to be fair, that's part of the reason why, AI researchers get sent to Hawaii for conferences.
Right, for sure. Yeah, well, I guess it's like twofold. One, it's good for tickets for movies, right? The concept of it.
Yeah.
I love all the movies you referenced. I especially love Her. That's an interesting thing because it does, the ending doesn't, in the way you see things evolving, the ending of Her doesn't jive with how you see it. But really far up into the movie, having a narrow AI that's a very advanced chatbot with very advanced natural language processing that's easily tricking the human being. And it's got the like you were saying with Tesla. Oh, I really love this part, which is the shadow. It's doing the, I'm totally blanking on this thing.
Yeah, right.
Shadow model.
It's doing, yeah. It's shadow. It's basically, as you're driving, it's figuring out what it would do if it were driving itself and comparing it to what you do.
That's called,
yeah, I'm trying to remember the term. It's called shadow.
I have it marked here.
Yeah, whatever it's called. Yeah, shadow something.
No problem. So I was thinking with the movie Her, it seems doable that you could have this very advanced chat, because I was surprised to find out in 1966, so a researcher created, I read the text from that chat. It does seem like it would fool somebody in 1966. Seems like it would fool somebody now.
Absolutely.
It was very good. And that's very old technology. So to think, man, really, if somebody were to take that technology and take it to 2022 and release it on the worldwide scale, one, you could have that technology interacting and fooling with people, but also getting much smarter. And then, like in the movie Her, you have this very advanced chatbot or whatever it is, or operating system in that movie, but let's just say a chatbot. Well, then it could have this shadow modeling of like, I should say this, and then the conversation will go here, but it's not actually testing all the time. And then you have this like network effect in a different way of just, they're being able to have such a larger data set of users interacting with the chatbot. Is there something like that right now happening?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And chatbots are getting smarter and smarter. And that's especially true because of these language models I mentioned OpenAI's GPT-3. Yeah, and they're definitely getting smarter and smarter. I shouldn't say that. They're not getting smarter and smarter.
They're getting fall into these.
That's right.
Traps. I know.
They're getting better and better at fooling people.
Right. I know. It's really tough. The reason I really got interested in all this stuff was when I had an Alexa. Well, I still have an Alexa device. Do you have Alexa devices at home?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't talk too much about Alexa because I'm an expert witness in a case in which a university is suing Amazon for patent infringement in Alexa. So
I believe it. Okay, I won't ask any more questions on that. But it's maybe I'm falling prey to what, when a robot looks like a human or like a fluffy animal, we start to love it. when we give them these cute names like Siri and Alexa, we start to like, we feel that, you know, that human connection forming, even though you, like in your book, you like, it's a toaster, everybody, you know, just remember it's a very advanced toaster, but you,
Right.
the human does get tricked. I get tricked. But I saw my daughter interact with it. She's 8 now. She was like, she was probably 4 years old. And she's using the Alexa device because she's seeing me use it. It's a timer, it plays music, we ask it questions. I really don't use it to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But I was wondering from her mind, what does she think this thing is? She knows it's not a toaster. She knows it's not like a Tinkerbell, like a little fairy in a cage. So it's this hybrid thing. And then I thought, oh, this is very weird. This Alexa that, you know, they've been playing with that technology for a little while. But let's say, you know, 4 years ago, what would that have been? 2018, 2017, a little bit before that. You know, really, Alexa started to really take off, even though they had been developing a little bit, you know, before that. But I started to think to myself, what if this is Atari in the 1970s? If this Alexa that we're seeing in 2018 is like the Atari of the 1970s, my God, what is this going to look like in 20, 30, 40 years?
Yeah.
What do you think it'll look like? This kind of technology that we have in our homes?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, I think it's just going to get more and more capable. It's going to be able to answer correctly more and more questions. But it's still not going to understand any more. You know, it's not going to understand like a human understands. It's not going to be really smart. It's just going to have a lot of essentially pre-programmed answers to questions. You know, so if you ask Alexa, you know, some off the wall, you know, question like, who do you think is the most beautiful person in the world? It can answer that because somebody's programmed the answer to it.
Right.
So, you know, you've got big staffs of people who are programming more and more of these answers. You're also these systems are also learning by computers that are, you know, reading through the internet and you know, finding answers to questions and you know, being able to predict, you know, if you ask me, if you say the world ended because, it can start to add words and make a story that actually sounds quite plausible. Not because it's thinking about why the world might end, but because, you know, it's basically read a lot of those kinds of continuations on the internet.
Right.
So it's going to seem smarter and smarter. But there's no chance that it's going to get so smart that it all of a sudden becomes conscious and says, hey, you know what? I don't want to answer this stupid guy's questions anymore.
You don't
I'm too
think
smart for that.
That's never going to happen for you.
That's not going to happen.
I know. I almost want to bet you. I don't know why. I'll bet you $1. But
Yeah, right.
I also am not like looking forward to a world like that. But what you know, like there is an obvious thing that's going to happen is that, you know, when I see my daughter interact with the thing, it's almost like a ghost in the shell. Is there like a little magical spirit in this thing? And if this is rudimentary, man, it's going to be very blurry and confusing for human beings to understand the difference in the future with the amount of data and how like intuitive it's going to get in responding to us. So in 20 years, this technology is going to easily trick the human mind into thinking it is thinking, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Not that that's its intention. It's just going to be so intuitive when such a huge data set that a human being will naturally be like, oh, well, this is, you know, the lines will be blurred. That line will be long blurred before, or if ever, this, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely going to happen.
Yeah.
And just as a little aside, you know, the name of my book was made up by my publisher, and I like it because it's catchy and everything. But my original title was "There's No Ghost in the Machine."
Oh yeah.
You know, getting back to what you said about the little spark there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know. I saw you reference that in there, and yeah. So it just that was the first thing as I'm reading. I thought to myself, okay, that line is going to be blurred, and humans are going to get confused by this technology. And there's almost no way, unless we don't make the robots look like human beings and little fuzzy animals, and if we don't give the robots weird robotic voices, humans, we have no chance of deciphering it. We'll be like thinking that we're speaking to AGI, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm reading the book, and then you do reference it towards the end, and I'm an idiot to this stuff. I don't know how any of this stuff works, but I start to think, why are we even trying to do this? Not from like a security privacy place, but more like it almost feels like the problem is being approached from the wrong angle. Because as you're talking about, it's so narrowly focused, and it doesn't feel like organic. It's not we're not messing with like the biology, and then because then you start talking about the human brain and how we really, in the grand scheme of things, don't really know what it is. It does start to, and I think about this often, and with the book, your book more so, I was like, why are they even trying to replicate it? Here in our minds, we have AGI. Why are we, and that makes me think of like Neuralink, why aren't we just trying to, instead of trying to invent life, we don't know how it got invented. It seems like maybe we'll never figure it out. We can't take a rock and make it a living rock, right? We don't know how that happened. And it's almost like that might be our problem with consciousness. We can't take a robot brain and make it like a human brain. We may not be able to make that gap, but here we do have brains, we do have this. So is there a way that you think that we'll be able to tap into it? Neuralink, when Elon Musk is talking about, he's like, hey, we want to cure disease. But then my mind's immediately like, which is crazy, you brought up, which I had never read about, fast thinking dog analogy. Then I'm thinking, wow, the real problem here is a fast thinking human. And that could be kind of that's where the dangerous thing maybe lies, is if one human brain could be unlocked and you have this hybrid, almost like an android.
Yep.
Then we can further unlock and speed up a human brain. Maybe that is the danger that we're kind of thinking about when we're talking about all these sci-fi, movies. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a lot more likely.
You do.
Than a computer achieving consciousness.
Right. Okay.
And obviously that kind of technology is really in its infancy, and we don't have any idea how far it's going to go. But that just seems more realistic to me than a computer becoming truly intelligent. So
do you think that would happen in your lifetime or mine, where we could see these fast thinking humans? And because that opens up all of the problems of the Terminator like world, but it seems more plausible. But do you think that'll happen in our lifetimes, that we would see something like that?
Well, David, I'm pretty sure it won't happen in mine, but it might well happen in yours.
How old are you?
68.
Oh, okay, cool. I'm 39.
Yeah, so
I'm catching up.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe but does that seem like why doesn't everyone just stop everything they're doing with the computers and just kind of go after the human mind a little bit more?
It's a really interesting question, and it's the mindset of researchers. So most AI researchers aren't really that focused on trying to build computers that gain consciousness. What they're focused on is trying to do narrow AI better.
Okay.
And better.
Oh, that's a huge distinction. Okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting because back in the 70s and 80s, when I got into AI, it was the opposite. We were trying to build, intelligent, conscious machines, and we failed. And what took over was a focus on engineering, and being able to do, small tasks better. And that's been hugely successful. And it's impacting, all of our society more in a good way, but, in some negative ways also. But I don't think the focus is on building conscious computers. It's on improving our ability to do these, everyday tasks that impact the world.
Do you like, so from the group that, yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. So from your group that feels like they failed at this, insanely lofty and, what you're saying, unachievable goal, are there still people who are like, damn it, I'm not giving up? Do you know of anyone who's just like, has gone insane? Like, I still have to figure this out. I don't care. I got to figure it out before I die. Are there people like that in this world?
I'm sure. I'm sure there are, and I occasionally read articles by people who are still there. Are certainly AI researchers who are focused on this, but I would say the majority aren't.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's one effort that started back in the early 80s.
Okay.
It was a big government-funded effort. In the early 80s, AI was really hot, and Japan was really hot as an economy. It was really growing fast, and everybody was afraid Japan was going to, take over the world economically. And they announced that they were going to invest a lot of money into AI.
Right.
And so the U.S. had to make a response to that, and they created a company called MCC down in Texas, and part of that effort was to fund a program called Psych that was started by a very smart Stanford professor named Doug Lenat. And the idea was to build all of the common sense knowledge in the world into a computer. So they were kind of spent effort trying to build as much knowledge into a computer as they could. And that effort went on and on and on. MCC fell apart, but that effort continued, and it continues to this day. And Doug Lenat is still running a company that's trying to build out that Psych. CYC is the name of the program.
Still on this mission.
He's still on the mission, absolutely.
God,
And there are many others.
Yeah. As I was thinking about that and thinking about how everybody's trying to hand code answers into the hard code the answers to all this stuff, I was reading something by John Vervaeke and the other people. They're talking about it's computationally explosive to try to get all this stuff. It's just the possibilities of figuring out how to do any of this. A robot that can wake up, hit the snooze button 3 times, drink a glass of water, walk across the room. Like the options just, they expand and expand and expand, where it does seem so improbable, regardless of like the storage and processing power. The combinations are just, it's endless to have a robot do those kind of things. But it was interesting. It's very weird that I don't know, have you thought about this in your book? Do you remember whose name you end on? The last 2 words?
Yeah, Johnny Depp.
It's like crazy with what's happening right now. Are you watching this thing with Johnny Depp at all?
Oh yeah.
It's hard to avoid it,
Yeah.
So yeah, you're like, don't shoot Johnny Depp.
Right.
So you wrote that because you wrote this. You were saying, this book came out February 2021.
Right.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, he's so popular right now. So I guess that's kind of going to the question of, so obviously Johnny Depp is not in the Bay Area working on AI. So to you, you don't have anyone that comes to mind who is that character, like the guy working on that thing, like I don't remember who the scientist is in Terminator who gets the arm and then.
Yeah.
There's no guy out there like that you know.
I mean, there are several, very well known, very well respected researchers, who are at least talking about how to build consciousness into computers. Probably the best known is Joshua Bengio in Montreal.
Okay.
And Jan LeCun, who's the head of Facebook AI and an NYU professor. they're two of the best known AI researchers in the world. And, they both talk about how we'll get to consciousness.
Yeah, interesting. And then going back, what do you think is the most dangerous use of narrow AI? If we're not worried about Terminator, right? So then what is the most dangerous use of narrow AI that you think we have to be careful of?
The thing that scares me the most is, believe it or not, self-driving cars.
Oh, it's so funny. It seems like you're so for it when you're reading about it.
Yeah, yeah.
So hopeful.
It's great technology. It's really cool. But what scares me is that, most governmental bodies, and this is true of the U.S. It's true of in the U.S. the Transportation and Safety Board. It's true at the state level. Everybody's so worried about accidents that they want to push self-driving car technology as fast as they can. And what I'm concerned about is that because self-driving cars can't think and reason, if you push it too fast, they're going to cause more accidents than we have now. And I believe that, yes, it's a very promising technology, but we need regulatory bodies to ensure that companies are testing self-driving cars and wherever they're putting them on the road, and holding self-driving car companies responsible if those cars get in accidents. And I don't see these governmental bodies doing that today, and that scares me. In Florida, where I have a house, anybody can put a self-driving car on the road with no regulatory requirements.
Florida's crazy when it comes to driving, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like
now self-driving cars. Now this is a crazy place to be.
Yeah, I mean, imagine. I hate to. I don't want to get into politics, but
it's okay.
Imagine a world where there was no regulation of drugs, so there's no FDA, and anybody can put on the market a cure for cancer. It would be chaos. Mm-hmm. People would be dying. People wouldn't be getting treated. I mean, and that's where we are with self-driving cars.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, got you. So that seems like the most.
That's the one I'm most concerned about.
Yeah, especially in the US. Now, China has the social credit system with all the facial recognition, and they're connecting all these data sets.
Yeah, privacy, which is a big issue for China. China's connecting all of its cameras together and monitoring, especially dissidents. That's a big concern. Privacy is a big concern. Fairness is a big concern because these facial recognition systems do a better job recognizing white males than recognizing minorities. So if you're looking for terrorists, minorities are more likely to get pulled aside in an airport, which is really unfair.
Yeah,
those are big issues. But they're also receiving a lot of attention.
And do you think that it could? Because when I read about it in China, I'm like, God, I hope it never happens here. But it seems like the groundwork is already laid, like here in the U.S. So then I'm thinking, is it inevitable that we will have, we almost already have this social credit system, but it's on the, it's behind the scenes. It's not so in our face, right? Because
I don't know. I mean, we can't even get red light cameras in most parts of the country.
I know. I kind of love that. I love that. I love that about here. But yeah, it does hinder progress. But with that progress, there are some scary consequences with it.
Yeah. The technology is there, certainly. It's just a question of whether the people, especially in the U.S., will accept it.
Yeah. Even it was saying something in China. You get penalized if you have a beard. I'm screwed. I'd be screwed.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
You gotta go out your front door. You have to be cleanly shaved. It's just weird little things that make you think. Like, I mean, privacy does matter, and being able to have agency matters, but that's very hard for regular people to explain why their privacy matters, because the response is always like, well, what do you have to hide? We're trying to help people. It's for the better, better good. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, the George Orwell wrote his book 1984, which seemed like, in 1984, it seemed impossible that it would ever happen.
Mhm.
And today we're in a situation where the technology makes it possible.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's scary.
Yeah. Well, do you have any other books that you're working on now, or any other projects that are going to go live?
I don't, nothing at that level. But working with some very interesting companies.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. How long did it take you to finish this book?
I wrote it when I was still trying to run a company. I started it when I was still trying to run a company, and I didn't make much progress on it.
Yeah.
And then when I retired from that company, I finished it in, like 6 months, and then it took a while to go through the publishing process.
Yeah. It flows really well. So.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That's more the editors than me.
Yeah. I love the format of it too. It's just clean and easy to read. So, well, that's pretty much all I have. Thank you. Unless anything else you feel like we didn't hit.
No, this was great.
Okay.
I
Cool.
enjoyed talking to you, David.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Bye, Steve.
All right.